Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to our cozy little corner of the internet. Today I'll be reading chapters 3, 4 and 5 of You're Not Like Them by Luffy Gear 5. If you hear noises outside, I've got the window open, it's a beautiful day. Anyway, let's get right into this. I hope you guys enjoy. There is a trigger warning for vomiting in the 3rd chapter, a slight overstimulation / panic attack in the 4th chapter, but that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoy, and let's get right into the fic. Chapter 3. Atsushi bowed as he entered the house, slipping off his shoes as Starzai headed in ahead of him, a slightly round woman leading them into the sitting room. He bent down, straightening out his shoes beside Darzai's. He glanced up at Akutagawa as Akutagawa places his shoes in line, followed by Chuya. Atsushi glanced up as the redhead offered a nod, moving further into the house of Akutagawa. At least Chuya-san doesn't seem to mind working with me too much. Atsushi straightened to his feet, breath catching with a wave of dizziness hitting him. He leant into the wall beside him, swallowing slowly as the feeling passed. Oi, Jinko. Atsushi quickly pushed himself off the wall, pretending to tuck in his shirt as Akutagawa poked his head around the doorway. The Ravenet looked over him. Stop being pathetic and hurry up. Everyone is waiting for you. Quickly pushing away his immediate annoyance, Atsushi stepped up from the doorway and entered the room. It was a small room with sofas organized around a small coffee table, a fresh pot of tea and cups placed upon it. Darzai sat on one, Chu and Akutagawa sat on another. The last was occupied by the woman. Atsushi studied her as he went to sit beside Darzai. She was in her 30s, but the dark circles and lines of stress on her face aged her. She had the classic softness that mothers had about her, and that Atsushi had only read in books. He'd never really understood that until he left the orphanage. He offered her a smile, nodding in greeting as she met his gaze. A small smile of her own graced her lips. A small nudge on his arm had Atsushi looking over to the brunette beside him. Darzai gave him a look, nodding at the woman. Ah, right. Clearing his throat softly, Atsushi held her gaze. I'm sorry, Hiyashi-san, for what you have to go through. Atsushi recalled the conversation he'd have with Darzai on the way over. He'd been told that he had somehow had a calming effect on people, more so than what Darzai could do. Although Atsushi doubted it, so Darzai had asked him to lead the conversation. Surprisingly, Chuya and Akutagawa had agreed, though the latter was more unwilling. Atsushi refocused as Hiyashi began speaking. Yes, well, she's paused, dropping her gaze to the floor. It's been difficult, but I can't lose hope. My daughter is out there. She's alive. I know she is. I just need to find her. Atsushi nodded. Of course, and that's why we're here to help you find her. He glanced at Darzai, continuing when the brunette nodded. Is there anything you could tell us about the day she went missing? Anything unusual? Hiyashi sniffled quietly in thought. She shook her head. I'm sorry. I thought it through over and over, and I can't. She broke off, tears spilling down her cheeks. Atsushi quickly got up and handed her a tissue and a cup of the tea. She forced a slow breath, nodding at him in thanks as she took the cup and wiped her damp cheeks. She shook her head again, now more composed though her voice shook. I thought over the day over and over again. There was nothing unusual, nothing odd. It was just a normal day. She went to school, and by the end of the day, she should come home. She paused, swallowing shakily. The school told me that she was there the whole day. It was on her way home that she went missing. I keep telling myself I should have picked her up. I should. She broke off again, ducking her face into her hands. She glanced around at the others, their gazes solemn as they sat with the woman's grief. There's nothing to find here. Darzai shifted. What school did she go to? Sendiyaga Elementary School. Do you know if any other children have gone missing from that school? Chuya asked. The woman shook her head. I'm not sure. I think maybe another boy from a different class, but she looked over them all. Please help me find my daughter. Please, I can't lose her. My baby girl, my baby. After she washed, as Dr. Gower stood, moving to comfort the woman, the Ravenette was reassuring, but clearly made sure not to promise anything. After she watched him, he didn't really understand loss. He was empathetic for her, understood her sadness somewhat, but then he didn't. He never had someone he cared about enough to lose. Don't get him wrong, he'll do anything for the agency, give his life for them, but losing them didn't really occur to him. He didn't feel like he had earned the ability to know what it felt like to lose someone. He shook his head. I'll give her the hope she wants. Baseless hope is harmful, but hope with some basis can be healing, even if the results are unpredictable. We'll help you find her, Hayashi-san. So, we'll find her. I promise. As she flopped onto his futon, his body ached, an odd tiredness pulling at his senses. He even felt a shiver run through his body. They visited 3 other families whose children had gone missing. All of them had come back with nothing. The children weren't ones to run. They were normal days. Nothing unusual happened. They should have walked them back. All the scenarios were the same. The attacks were unprecedented and random. They didn't even seem to occur regularly. All the children were from different schools, but a few who went to the larger primary schools in Tokyo. Dazai had checked after they got back. Atsushi sighed, grimacing as he picked himself up and forced himself to change. What are the patterns? Suddenly, his stomach dropped. Atsushi dropped his gloves and tie, rushing to the bathroom. He bent over the toilet seat before a flood of bile rushed its way out of his throat. Atsushi coughed as it burned his throat, gagging at the bitter taste on his tongue. He was partially glad he hadn't eaten yet. At least the food wouldn't have gone to waste, though he don't think he can eat anything now either. He felt his stomach lurching again and shifted forward, only for nothing else to come up. He sighed, shakily standing to wash his hands and rinse his mouth. Glancing at the toilet, he flushed away his sick before washing his hands and splashing his face with cold water. He braced himself on the sink for a moment before closing his eyes. You're not ill. You can't be ill. Stop being pathetic. You need to help with the others. You need to solve the case. Chapter 4. The next morning, Atsushi felt even worse. His stomach felt like it had caved inwards, though he didn't have any appetite to eat. His skin was hot and clammy, sweat causing his hair to stick to his forehead. Despite the sweat, he was also cold, constant shivers running over his body. He gritted his teeth, pushing himself upright. His ears rang, skin sensitive against his clothes. And then there was that high-pitched whine from the vents. Atsushi grimaced, not for the first time, hating his heightened senses. Too many times they pushed him into a sensory overload, and each time, Dazai had come to cancel his ability and calm him. Not this time. Atsushi scowled, pushing to his feet, ignoring the discomfort in his body and forcing himself to shower. The hot water was burning his skin. The water was so loud in his ears as it became a constant drone. Atsushi stood there, forcing himself to stay as he washed off the clamminess of his skin before shutting it off. The sudden quiet was disconcerting as he stumbled out of the shower, having to grip the sink as he dried himself off. A knock sounded from his front door. It was a jarringly loud noise, lashing his eardrums. Atsushi gasped, clamping his hands over his ears as he stepped out of the bathroom. The knocking sounded again. Atsushi felt his breath pick up, dropping to his knees. Stop being pathetic. Pull yourself together. Atsushi-kun, are you up yet? A voice called. Dazai. Atsushi gasped a breath, stumbling over to his work clothes. He hurriedly put his pants on and trousers, belting them around his waist. The fabric was rough and scratchy. He winced with each movement it had against him. Atsushi-kun? Dazai knocked again. He gasped heavily. Lights in his room too bright. Phone. I need my phone. Atsushi? Atsushi couldn't get his senses to focus. The noises, the colours, and the fabric against his skin was all too much. His body ached and it wasn't leaving. He curled up, pressing his back against the wall beside him, and ducked his head, hands clamping over his ears. His own thumping heartbeat and rushing blood filled his head, at the noise accompanying him. Atsushi pulled in a breath, listening to his heartbeat gradually slow. He could feel a bead of water trickle down his neck from his hair, soaking into his towel. He could feel his eyes shifting from the tiger's ones to his own. The confusion in his senses registered danger. A flare of alarms rang in his body as he felt a presence before him. He flinched at the hand grasping his own. His eyes swung open, adrenaline flooding him. Yet the world remained in its quiet state. Quieter, actually. Atsushi breathed heavily, blinking quickly to focus his eyes. Dazai sat before him, a look of concern on his face. Atsushi-kun, are you with me? Forcing a slow breath into his lungs, Atsushi nodded. Sorry, Dazai-san. Dazai shook his head, keeping a hold of his hand. I told you to tell me if this happened. Atsushi nodded. I know, I couldn't find my phone in time. Dazai sighed, sitting back. You haven't had one of these for a while. Swallowing past his dry throat, Atsushi nodded again. I know, maybe it's just the unfamiliar environment. Lie. You know full well it's because you're ill. He shoved the thought away, glancing up at the brunette. Where are Octagao and Chuya-san? I told them to wait outside. Did they see? I'm sorry, we didn't know why you weren't responding. Dazai glanced up at as two sets of footsteps entered the room. He felt a blush rush to his face, keeping his gaze away from the mafiosos. I'm sorry. Chuya huffed. Kid, with an ability like yours, I'm surprised you don't have this all the time. Atsushi frowned as he looked up at the redhead. What do you mean? Chuya raised an eyebrow. Your ability gives you height senses equivalent to a tiger, right? Atsushi nodded. So you can hear frequencies up to 60 kHz, smell things up to 4 miles away, and your sense of touch is being heightened. I can't imagine what your eyes must be doing either, so take it as a fucking compliment. Octagao scoffed. You can't control it yet. Atsushi sighed. The relief he felt at Chuya's words quickly squashed by Octagawa's. We should get going. I'll be ready in 5 minutes. The three looked at him before nodding. Dazai cautiously released his hands, studying his face as he stood. Atsushi smiled, nodding, despite the rush of information his body received the moment his ability returned. Thank you, Dazai-san. Atsushi watched as the three left, carefully unfolding himself from his position. He suddenly realized his bare abdomen and blushed as he hurriedly slipped on his shirt to cover the multiple scars on him. Yep, his body was still achy and shivery. Random spikes of pain lacing through his chest. Atsushi huffed in annoyance. This couldn't get any worse. Chapter 5. I take that back. Atsushi's head felt stuffy, and he also felt like his senses were working in overdrive the whole day. His body felt exhausted, and he hadn't even done much. He was lucky none of the others had noticed as he forced himself to act normally. He shook himself mentally, looking up as a man entered the room. His wife, who sat with them, beckoned him over. The two's son had gone missing only a week ago. Again, the attack seemed random, and there was nothing unusual. The only difference was that there was a recording of the attack on a traffic camera. The woman nodded at them. I'll play the recording now. She held out the remote, pressing one of the buttons. Atsushi shifted his attention, ignoring his body's discomfort. The recording was during the daytime, and glancing at the time at the screen, it was just after school had ended. It showed a child, no more than 8 years old, walking along the street. He wore a rucksack that looked way too big for him, and his steps bouncy as he walked, a packet of sweets in his hand. There was a building working beside him, a red Vauxhall hatchback just to his left. Atsushi felt the hairs on his neck rise as the boy approached the vehicle. Within the next few seconds, the car door opened and the boy was pulled into the vehicle. There was a short struggle before the car drove away. A series of shaky breathing filled the air. Atsushi walked over to where the parents sat, the husband comforting his wife, tears in his eyes. The man looked up from the gaze. The police already tracked the car. It was found abandoned in the car park. Akutagawa frowned. Which car park was this? I can give you the location details if you like. Thank you. Atsushi glanced at Chuya, who sat there with a frown on his brow. The redhead shared a look with Dazai. Atsushi looked between the two of them before returning his gaze to the screen. We might have a lead. Atsushi swallowed harshly, pushing away the tension in his shoulders at the senses yet again overwhelming him. Only this time, he was triggered by the vibrations of the car beneath him. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus on the world scrolling past his window. The car park isn't too far from here, Chuya commented, searching the outside. It's best to start checking if there's anything there so we can see along the roads. Atsushi nodded, hoping to keep his discomfort hidden. Luckily, it didn't take long to reach their destination, and none of the others had called out on seeing anything unusual. Atsushi clenched his jaw as the engine finally silenced and the car stilled. It was a relief. His senses usually didn't do this, not like they were recently. It didn't help that his body was feeling weak and tired either. He flinched slightly as the others opened their doors to leave the car, and he hurriedly followed. The motion caused a lightheadedness to flood him. His eyes wavered slightly, but he straightened his back, following Dazai around the space. Chuya and Akutagawa just behind. Looks like the police have already removed the car from this area, Chuya commented, looking over the area. It was an old car park. The white paint on the ground had faded along with potholes littering the tarmac. Dazai crouched beside the space, studying the ground. Any track marks or evidence would have been taken by the police too. He frowned, standing. The brunette glanced around, pocketing his hands. Atsushi watched him, his body suddenly feeling hot, eyesight starting to blacken. Come on, stop it. Oi, Jinko, Akutagawa called. You see anything here? Atsushi could barely reply. He did in fact smell a scent. It was weak, and not one he had smelt from anywhere they had been so far, but his body was betraying him. He felt his breath picking up, eyelids start to drop. He stumbled slightly, body going weak. Dazai-san, His legs collapsed up beneath him, eyelids dropping shut, leaving him in darkness. His hearing was the last to fade, the panicked shouts of the others ringing in his ears. Okay, everyone, that was chapter 3, 4, and 5 of You're Not Like Them by Luffy Gear 5. I really love this fic, and I did 3 chapters today because, the chapters were a little bit short. I think chapter 6 a bit longer, so I'll only do 2 chapters for the next video. I don't know. Well, I'm assuming anyway. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys all later. Bye!